Hostile beginnings. Commander Reese Blackwood leaned against the crystalline railing of the Zenturian Embassy's observation deck, watching the artificial rings of New Geneva Space Station rotate majestically against the backdrop of Jupiter's swirling storms. His dark uniform with Earth Alliance insignia stood in stark contrast to the flowing, ethereal architecture of the alien diplomatic complex. Admiring superior Zenturian engineering, Commander? Or simply daydreaming about your primitive military exercises? The melodic yet cutting voice belonged to Ambassador Alira Vaccine, her silvery skin shimmering under the ambient lighting as she approached. The ambassador's elaborate headdress of bioluminescent tendrils shifted colors with her emotions, currently displaying hues of smug superiority. Reese straightened his posture, squaring his broad shoulders. Just wondering how a species with such advanced technology could produce diplomats with such poor negotiation skills, he replied, keeping his voice steady despite his irritation. Alira's tendrils flashed a brief angry red before settling into a cool blue. At least my species didn't nearly destroy their homeworld before stumbling into interstellar space like children playing with matches. And yet here I am, representing those children at the Galactic Confederation, Reese countered. Must be frustrating for you. Their mutual antagonism was nothing new. For the past 8 months since humans had gained provisional membership in the Galactic Confederation, Ambassador Vaccine had made it her personal mission to highlight every human shortcoming, block every human initiative, and publicly mock Earth's representatives at every opportunity. High Counselor Jorian, a towering amphibious Aquarian, approached them with undulating movements. Ambassador Vaccine, Commander Blackwood, the special session on the Proxima Centauri Defensive Pact begins in 15 minutes. Of course, Counselor, Alira said, her voice transforming into diplomatic honey. I've prepared comprehensive notes on the security protocols. As have I, Reese added, extracting a data slate from his uniform pocket. The High Counselor nodded and moved away, leaving them in their bubble of mutual hostility. I've seen your kind of preparation before, Commander, Alira hissed once they were alone. Humans barely qualify for provisional status. Your species is nothing but violent opportunists playing at civilization. Reese felt his jaw tighten. This was the 3rd time this week she'd publicly belittled Earth's representatives. The constant mockery was wearing thin, especially since Earth had contributed significant forces during the recent Vorax incursion, protecting Confederation worlds, including Alira's homeworld of Zenter. A plan began forming in his mind. You know what, Ambassador? I think we should work more closely together. Alira's tendrils stiffened in surprise. Excuse me. The diplomatic mission to Outpost Epsilon needs representatives from both our worlds. It would demonstrate unity to the Confederation if we volunteered together. She laughed, a sound like crystal chimes despite her personality. You want me to spend 3 days on a remote outpost with you? How desperate for companionship are you, Commander? Not at all, Reese replied coolly. I simply think it would be beneficial for both our worlds to demonstrate cooperation. Unless you're afraid you can't maintain your composure working alongside a primitive human, for a few days. Her eyes, with their distinctive double irises, violet outer ring, silver inner, flashed with competitive fire. I negotiated peace between the Cygnus Collective and the Arcturus Dominion. I can certainly manage babysitting one human for a diplomatic mission. Excellent, Reese said, hiding his satisfaction. I'll inform the Council of our joint volunteering. As they walked toward the Council chambers, Reese felt a flicker of guilt about his motivations. Outpost Epsilon was notorious for its isolation and tendency to force cooperation between even hostile diplomats. The cramped quarters, limited recreational facilities, and distance from political theater often broke down the barriers between representatives. He wasn't proud of wanting to humble her, but after months of her public ridicule of humanity, something had to give. What he didn't anticipate was how spectacularly his plan would backfire. 3 days later, they boarded a sleek diplomatic vessel bound for Outpost Epsilon. Reese had spent the journey reviewing mission parameters while Alira pointedly ignored him, working on her own data slate across the cabin. Docking in 20 minutes, the autopilot announced. Wonderful, Alira muttered. 3 days trapped with a human in the middle of nowhere. My career has reached new heights. Rhys sighed. Look, we both know this isn't ideal, but we're representing our worlds. Can we at least try to be professional? Professional? She set down her data slate. Like how you professionally manipulated this assignment to force me into close quarters with you. Don't think I didn't realize what you were doing, Commander. Rhys had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. I thought some time away from political theater might help us work together better. There's nothing to understand, she said coldly. Your species is young, impulsive, and dangerously unpredictable. The only reason you have a Confederation seat is because you're useful cannon fodder. And your species is arrogant, condescending, and so convinced of their superiority they can't recognize when they need allies, Rhys shot back. The tension between them was palpable as the ship docked at the outpost, a modest station orbiting a gas giant's moon. The facility was smaller than Rhys had expected, with just enough room for essential diplomatic functions and living quarters. Ambassador Vaccine, Commander Blackwood, greeted the outpost director, a diminutive insectoid being. Welcome to Outpost Epsilon. The Bellatrix representatives will arrive tomorrow. Tonight, we've prepared a traditional welcome reception. The reception turned out to be a small gathering with local delicacies and drinks. Rhys noticed Alira reluctantly sipping a glowing purple liquid. Careful with the Lunarian nectar, he warned. It affects different species differently. I'm quite familiar with interstellar beverages, Commander, she replied dismissively, taking another, larger sip. Unlike humans, my people have been part of galactic society for millennia. Rhys shrugged and turned his attention to the outpost director, unaware that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn that would change both their lives forever, and reverse the power dynamics of their relationship in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Close quarters diplomacy. As the evening progressed, Rhys noticed a subtle shift in Alira's normally rigid demeanor. The shimmering tendrils framing her face began to pulse with gentler colors, amber and rose instead of their usual cold blue. The Lunarian nectar, famous throughout the galaxy for its potent effects, seemed to be softening the sharp edges of her personality. You should probably slow down, Rhys suggested, approaching her after she'd consumed her fourth glass. The purple liquid cast a faint glow on her silvery skin. Are all humans such tedious wardens? Alira asked, but her usual venom was missing. Instead, her double-irised eyes held a curious gleam as she studied his face. You know, for a supposedly primitive species, you have surprisingly symmetrical features. Rhys raised an eyebrow. Was that almost a compliment, Ambassador? Merely a scientific observation, she replied, but a subtle shimmer rippled across her skin, the Zenturian equivalent of a blush. Your species' genetic diversity is interesting. The outpost director had long since retired, leaving them alone in the small reception area. Through the viewport, the swirling clouds of the gas giant created a mesmerizing backdrop. Perhaps we should call it a night, Rhys suggested, noticing how Alira swayed slightly. Always giving orders, Commander, she said, her voice softer than usual. Is that how humans court each other? With commands and control? Rhys felt his pulse quicken. I wasn't aware we were discussing courtship rituals. We weren't, she moved closer, her tendrils pulsing with colors he'd never seen them display before. But I've always been curious about humans. Your kind burst onto the galactic scene so recently, yet you've made such an impact. Not all of it positive, according to you, Rhys reminded her. Alira laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him. Perhaps I've been harsh in my assessments. She reached out, her slender fingers hovering near his face. May I? Rhys nodded, unsure what she intended. Her fingers lightly traced the contours of his face, a traditional Zenturian gesture of curiosity. Your skin is warmer than ours, she murmured. Higher body temperature. Efficient. Is that approval I hear? Rhys teased, finding himself enjoying her touch more than he should. The nectar talking, perhaps, she admitted but didn't pull away. On Zenter, we're taught that humans are dangerous, unpredictable, but there's something compelling about that unpredictability. Rhys caught her hand in his. And on Earth, we're taught that Zenturians are cold, calculating, and arrogant. Are we not? Her tendrils pulsed with playful colors. You certainly are, he said with a small smile. But maybe there's more beneath the surface. The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Rhys was acutely aware of how close they stood, how the ambient light played across her silvery skin, how her formal attire accentuated her alien yet familiar curves. We should really get some rest, Rhys said, his voice rougher than intended. Always the responsible one, Alira murmured, but she didn't move away. What if I don't want to rest? Warning bells rang in Rhys's mind, but the Lunarian nectar he'd consumed, though less than Alira had, dulled his usual caution. What do you want, then? Her tendrils curled in a pattern he recognized as a sign of desire among her species. To explore these cultural differences more thoroughly. Rhys knew he should step back, maintain professional boundaries. This was exactly the opposite of what he'd intended when arranging this mission. Yet he found himself drawn to her, fascinated by this glimpse of the woman beneath the diplomatic armor. Cultural exploration is important for diplomatic relations, he heard himself say. Alira's laugh was low and musical. Indeed. And I have always been a dedicated diplomat. She led him toward her quarters, her movements graceful despite the nectar's influence. As the door closed behind them, Rhys knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but in that moment, neither of them seemed to care. Cultural differences became points of fascination rather than conflict, and for hours, they forgot about being representatives of their worlds, becoming simply Rhys and Alira. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. Rhys woke first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the night before rushed back as he saw Alira sleeping beside him, her silvery skin luminescent in the dim light, her tendrils relaxed in slumber. Stars above, he muttered, carefully extracting himself from the bed. What had he done? This was the opposite of professional conduct. He'd wanted to teach her a lesson about respect, not this. Alira stirred, her double-irised eyes opening slowly. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then recognition and horror. You, she said, sitting up abruptly and clutching the sheet to her chest. This cannot have happened. I believe it did, Rhys replied, already gathering his scattered clothing. Multiple times, if memory serves. This isn't funny, Commander, her tendrils went rigid with distress. Do you have any idea what this means? A Zenturian diplomat and a human military representative? The Confederation would have a field day. Rhys paused in dressing. No one needs to know. We're both adults. It was a lapse in judgment. A lapse? Her eyes narrowed dangerously. What would you call it? He challenged. She opened her mouth and closed it again. A mistake. One that will not be repeated. Agreed, Rhys said, though a part of him felt strangely disappointed by her declaration. We still have 2 days of this mission. I suggest we focus on our diplomatic duties and pretend last night never happened. For once, Commander, we are in complete agreement, Alira said coldly, though he noticed her tendrils pulsing in what appeared to be confusion rather than anger. As Rhys left her quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that his plan for revenge had backfired spectacularly. He'd wanted to teach her humility, not create a diplomatic incident, or worse, forge a connection he hadn't anticipated. The arrival of the Bellatrix representatives couldn't have come at a worse time. Rhys stood at the docking bay, his posture military straight as he watched the sleek vessel approach. Beside him, Alira maintained a careful distance, her silvery complexion slightly paler than usual. Are you feeling all right, Ambassador? Rhys asked quietly, noticing how she pressed a hand to her midsection. Perfectly fine, she snapped, though without her usual fire. The nectar's after effects, nothing more. Before Rhys could respond, the airlock cycled open, revealing 3 representatives from the Bellatrix system, tall, ethereal beings with translucent skin that rippled with light. Ambassador Vaccine, Commander Blackwood, the lead Bellatrix greeted them, light patterns dancing across his skin in formal patterns. I am Delegate Thoris. These are my associates, Delegates Nivenix and Jorl. Welcome to Outpost Epsilon, Reese replied with practiced diplomacy. We're honored by your presence. Alira stepped forward, her diplomatic mask firmly in place despite her discomfort. The Galactic Confederation values this opportunity to strengthen our alliance with the Bellatrix Consortium. As they escorted the delegates to the conference room, Reese noticed Alira subtly pressing her hand against her temple. Twice she paused, taking deep breaths before continuing. The negotiations began smoothly enough. The Bellatrix were interested in establishing trade routes through their sector, and both Earth and Zender stood to benefit from the arrangement. Reese found himself impressed by Alira's skill despite her apparent discomfort. Her arguments were precise, her knowledge of interstellar commerce extensive. The proposed route through the Cerulean Passage would reduce transit time by 23%, she explained, displaying star charts on the holographic projector. Delegate Thoris's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns. But the Cerulean Passage borders Vorix territory. The risk is minimal, Reese interjected. Earth Alliance's 7th Fleet maintains regular patrols in that sector. We can guarantee safe passage. Alira shot him a look, not of irritation, but something closer to surprise. For once, they were working in tandem rather than opposition. Midway through the presentation, however, Alira suddenly paled dramatically, her tendrils going limp, a sign of distress Reese had never seen before. If you'll excuse me for a moment, she said, her voice strained. Without waiting for a response, she hurried from the room. Ambassador Vaccine seems unwell, observed Delegate Nivenix, her skin patterns shifting to concerned ripples. She's recovering from our welcome reception, Reese explained diplomatically. If you'll excuse me as well, I should check on her. He found Alira in the corridor outside, leaning heavily against the wall, her breathing labored. What's happening? He asked, genuine concern overriding their awkwardness. Nothing that concerns you, she insisted, but her legs buckled. Reese caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight against him. This isn't normal nectar after effects, he said. You need medical attention. What I need is for you to return to the negotiations, she hissed, though she didn't push him away. This will pass. Reese hesitated, torn between diplomatic duty and genuine concern. At least let me help you to your quarters. She relented, allowing him to guide her down the corridor. In her quarters, she sank onto the edge of her bed, her tendrils trembling slightly. This has been happening since this morning, she admitted reluctantly. Waves of dizziness, nausea. Reese frowned. Could it be some kind of reaction between the nectar and your physiology? Possibly, she conceded, though I've consumed Lunarian nectar before without such effects. An uncomfortable silence fell between them as the unspoken possibility hung in the air. Reese knew from his xenobiology briefings that most spacefaring species were genetically incompatible, but there were rare exceptions, especially when certain substances were involved. The silence stretched between them, filled with implications neither was ready to voice. Impossible revelation. Reese paced outside the medical bay of Outpost Epsilon, his mind racing through possibilities he'd never considered before. The Bellatrix delegation had graciously agreed to postpone negotiations until the following day, concerned by Ambassador Vaccine's sudden illness. The door slid open, revealing the outpost's medical officer, Dr. Nalia Voss, a hybrid herself, half human and half Arcturian, with subtle blue markings along her temples. Commander Blackwood, she greeted him with a professional nod. You can see her now. Reese hesitated. How is she? Dr. Voss's expression remained carefully neutral. That's for the ambassador to discuss with you. Inside the medical bay, Alira sat on the edge of an examination table, her tendrils completely still, a sign of shock among Zenturians. She barely glanced up when Reese entered. I've analyzed the results, Dr. Voss said, activating a holographic display between them. Ambassador Vaccine is pregnant with what appears to be a human-Zenturian hybrid embryo. The words hung in the air between them. Reese felt as though the artificial gravity had suddenly failed. That's impossible, he said automatically. Improbable, Dr. Voss corrected. But clearly not impossible. The Lunarian nectar contains trace elements that temporarily alter cellular receptivity in certain species. This created a brief window of reproductive compatibility between you. Elira finally spoke, her voice unnaturally flat. Dr. Voss was just explaining that there are only 4 documented cases of cross-species conception in Confederation records. 5 now, the doctor added. Reese ran a hand through his hair, struggling to process this information. Is it viable? The embryo appears healthy, Dr. Voss replied, expanding the holographic image to show a tiny cluster of cells. Human and Zenturian genetic structures are surprisingly complementary in certain key areas. However, this is unprecedented territory. I would recommend comprehensive medical monitoring throughout the pregnancy. If I choose to continue it, Elira said sharply. Dr. Voss nodded. That is, of course, your decision, Ambassador. But I must advise that we know very little about such hybrid pregnancies. You should take time to consider all options carefully. I need to speak with the commander alone, Elira said. After Dr. Voss departed, a heavy silence filled the room. Reese struggled to find words adequate for the situation. I never intended, he began. Of course you didn't, Elira interrupted, her voice bitter. This wasn't part of your little revenge scheme, was it? When you arranged our mission to this outpost. Revenge? Reese echoed, genuinely confused. Don't play innocent, she hissed, her tendrils finally moving, flashing angry red. You wanted to humiliate me. The arrogant Zenturian ambassador forced to cooperate with the human she'd been mocking. Reese couldn't deny it entirely. I wanted to improve our working relationship. Maybe teach you some respect for humanity. Not create an interspecies diplomatic incident. Despite everything, Elira laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. Well, you've certainly accomplished the latter. Reese moved closer, stopping when her tendrils flared defensively. What do you want to do? Do? Her double-irised eyes narrowed. You think this is a joint decision? It affects both of us, Reese said carefully. Both our careers, both our worlds. My career is over the moment this becomes public, Elira said, placing a hand protectively over her abdomen. The first Centurion human hybrid in history, conceived during a drunken diplomatic indiscretion. I'll be recalled to Zenter, disgraced, an object of scientific curiosity at best. It doesn't have to be that way, Reese insisted. Things are changing in the Confederation. After the Vorax incursion, there's more cooperation between species than ever before. How optimistic, she said, but her tendrils had shifted from angry red to a more contemplative purple. Your career would likely survive. Humans might even celebrate you for it, another first for your young species. Reese shook his head. I don't care about that. I care about what happens to you, and to our child. Our child. The words hung between them, transforming the abstract embryo into something more real, more significant. I need time, Elira said finally. Time to think, to decide.